geographers to changing urban systems. Now, the inquiry is how economic and demographic processes bring change over time to urban systems. So, when we talk about economic processes, we're thinking about demand, supply, economic growth, productivity, but also industrialization and post industrial cities and deindustrialization. In terms of demographic processes, we're looking at growing populations, aging populations, natural growth or natural decline, migration trends, population growth rate. And when we think about systems, urban systems, we'll be talking about those processes over time. So the syllabus point 1 is urbanisation, natural increase, and centripetal population movements, including rural to urban migration in industrialising cities, so developing nations, and inner city gentrification in post-industrial cities. So countries and cities that have already experienced industrialisation, these are our developed nations in North America, Europe, and Australia and New Zealand. So more than 50% of the world's population live in urban areas now. We can see here on this map that North America, Europe, Australia, but also South America and North Africa and West Asia all have population proportion of at least 50% or over living in urban areas. And we see that South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are catching up. Papua New Guinea here is also currently only 20% live in urban areas, majority are living in rural areas. But we're seeing rapid rural to urban migration, rapid urbanization in these areas. Note that these post-industrial nations like Australia, let's say France, they already have experienced rapid urbanization and now are more so experiencing urban growth rather than urbanization. So when we talk about the difference between urban growth and urbanization, urban growth is proportionate to the total population growth. So you can see here, originally in the 1900s, there was only 1/3 of the population were urban dwellers. And even though populations increased from 2 million to over 4 million in 2025 in this particular country, city, it's still just 1/3 of the total population, as the total population has increased proportionately. Whereas urbanization, we can see that originally in 1900, only 1/3 of the population were urban dwellers, but then by 2025, more than half of the population are urban dwellers. So this means that there is a shift in the distribution of the population. People are moving from other areas into the city in this case. So clear definitions. Urban growth can also just mean the physical size of the urban area growing in extent. Okay, so it can mean urban sprawl where the city physically becomes larger in terms of land area, or it can mean the population is growing, but it's in proportion to the total population overall. Whereas urbanization, it's the increase in percentage of population living in urban centres relative to the surrounding region. It implies a societal shift from rural to urban living, and it involves a change in population distribution. I've given you some examples here. Tokyo, Japan has already experienced rapid urbanization between the 1900s to the 2000s, and now it's kind of reached a plateau. However, there's still developments taking place, such as the infrastructure development of the largest infrastructure development was the Tokyo Outer Ring Road expansion, so the Gaikan Expressway. There's also vertical infrastructure development. As Tokyo can't further expand outward, it has to expand vertically or grow vertically. So when we look at this expressway, we can see it's this Tokyo Outer Ring Road is designed to increase accessibility to industrial and commercial zones and disperse traffic congestion in Tokyo. So rather than this monocentric model where everyone from the outer all travels to one center of activity, it's trying to increase the polycentric model where lots of people are moving to outer areas, some people moving between outer areas, just like our Melbourne Suburban Rail Loop project is connecting outer ring suburbs together so that more people are moving to these areas rather than everyone going into one single center of activity. So that's what we mean by monocentric versus polycentric. So this is the Gaikan Expressway. We can see that Tokyo has really expanded rapidly between the 1820s to the 1980s. This is where we see the largest urbanization. And nowadays, though, we are seeing urban decline. So actually, the population of Tokyo has declined by 0.21% from 2024. And this is consistent with the trend since 2021, or during the pandemic, really. And so, has Tokyo reached its peak city? And what does that mean? If it's now, a post-industrial city, there's now deindustrializing. There's less people that feel there's less demand to live in these mega city areas, even though it's still economic capital. There's still lots of job opportunities there. What does that mean? So let's look at an example of urbanization. One of the fastest growing cities in the world, Lagos in Nigeria, experiencing mass rural to urban migration. How big is the scale of migration? Well, there's 600,000 people moving there every single year. So Nigeria is becoming urbanized as a country. Let's look at the example in further detail. We can see here that the urbanization through the figures that in 2024, 16.5 million people lived there, which is 590,000 increase from the previous year. In 2025, to date, it is currently 17.1 million in terms of the population. That's 3.5% growth per year. So as you can see, the population, the rural-urban migration that's taking place in Lagos is outpacing the government's ability to support the mass migration in terms of infrastructure and housing. And as a result, the slum areas such as Makoko are increasing, and we're seeing urban sprawl. And these people are living in extreme poverty, only earning $1.25 USD per day. So it presents a huge problem. There's a lack of, sanitation, infrastructure, services that are able to support these people. And furthermore, the people who are living in urban areas, the rural people that have now moved to urban areas lack the skills to be able to support themselves in in jobs that industrial areas demand. So while they might have been skilled in agricultural knowledge, they often don't have the skill set to be able to support themselves in these cities. And so as a result, they resort to jobs in the informal sectors. It can be something as menial as car washing or begging on the streets. It can even lead to prostitution. We see that there's more men that migrate to the cities from rural areas than women, and that leads to a gender ratio imbalance where there's a disproportionate number of, or there's a skew towards the 20 to 45 age brackets. There's a larger skew towards males compared to females, and then in those rural areas, there's a higher old age and youth dependency ratio as a result, and also more females. So here's a map of Lagos, and you can see now that 54.3% of people live in urban areas, whereas before half the population in 2015 lived in rural areas. Natural change is basically when we compare births to death rates. If there's a natural increase, it means the birth rates are higher than the death rates. And so now we're going to look at centripetal population movement. And then the next lesson we'll look at centrifugal population movement. Centripetal means that people are moving from middle and outer ring suburbs as well as rural areas into the city centres. We see this in developing nations that are industrialising. Okay, so there's economic opportunity here. There might be foreign investment, which helps to develop the infrastructure, the road networks. And so that all contributes to centripetal population movement. On the other hand, there's also centrifugal, which we see in post-industrial, so developed nations that are deindustrializing. We see that trend, which we'll discuss next time. Centripetal population movement includes three different processes: rural to urban migration in industrializing cities, but also inner city gentrification in post-industrial cities and urban renewal. Okay, so one example of centripetal population movement in industrializing areas is Papua New Guinea. Port Moresby, as we know, 61% of the population were not born there. They migrated there from rural areas. Formal housing development lags behind the demand. 50% live in sprawling informal settlements as a result. Here we can see the injustice of, people who have been living in the fringes of Port Moresby are now seeing that land development which is taking place is forcibly removing people from their homes. And because it was originally an informal settlement, thousands of people are now facing homelessness as a result. In Dhaka, Bangladesh, we are seeing rapid rural to urban migration. In fact, 80% of the city's growth has come from rural to urban migration. 20% has come from natural increase. Okay, Dhaka is a growing population, high birth rates, but also high rural to urban migration. Again, as a result, there are 4 million slum dwellers in Dhaka. When we think about gentrification, it's this idea that the heritage buildings, the facade is retained, but the actual land use might be rezoned into commercial, and the redeveloping or rejuvenating these buildings by new businesses moving in and attracting more people to live in these areas. Oftentimes, these redevelopments can lead to the local people all of a sudden not being able to afford to live there anymore and are forced to move out into other suburbs. It can also lead to young professionals replacing these poorer residents, and due to the increased land and property prices. And so the old buildings, rundown areas experiencing urban decay are then acquired by property developers or middle-class residents, and these old buildings are restored, the value is raised, the original character is retained. I wanted to also show Footscray because the development of train stations, transportation networks, investment into transport and infrastructure also attracts people to these locations. Urban renewal, on the other hand, is completely clearing the buildings that exist for redevelopment. And in this case, in the 1990s, it was a decaying area, and so Crown Casino was built. Then hotels and restaurants and shopping centres were built surrounding this attraction, helping to renew South Bank. It can be considered controversial with these high-rise buildings obstructing the views, and also, this rapid vertical growth that we're seeing right now, a 29-story towers to be built, and putting an Edwardian heritage listed building at risk of being demolished. Boyd Park redevelopment was also controversial. It's the removal of green infrastructure or green spaces and then removal of public spaces for development. That can lead to local area protests. All right, next we'll look at centrifugal population movement. We'll save that for next time.